So, today's lecture level will be at the level of class 12 or maybe the initial years of Bachelor of Science. Not much science or high level physics is required for that, as I have confined my talk to discussion on Newton's laws, which all of you are very familiar with from your school days. This is the title, as you can see. I have seen in your notification as a previous director of IIT Kharagpur, but I would like to show you something about the institutions where I have done this work, and you can see here that this is the institute where I have primarily worked and developed all the things which I am going to talk about, that is IIT Kanpur. This is what I developed at IIT Kharagpur as Golden Jubilee. This is the old building where the IIT system started, and this is of course the facade of the main building of IIT Kharagpur, where I finally encapsulated all the things I did since 1983 in the form of a book, a copy of which I have brought, and I will hand it over to our beloved director tomorrow's lecture time for the library of NIT TTR. Now, this is the place where I am working currently, Bengal Engineering Science University, and which is a very old institution. It was started in 1856, the second oldest institution, and these are some of the views of the institution. Of course, not this, you can realize that we cannot claim it to be our campus, but these are the various views of the campus of Bengal Engineering Science University, where I am currently working. This is the place where you can go in the evening to the bank of Ganges if you are tired of your brain work throughout the day. So, now let me tell you that how I have organized this work. The main purpose of this work today is to tell my young student friends that nothing is final in science. No theory should be considered as the last one, and no dogma should be allowed to interfere with your mind, whoever may have presented it. So, today's example is one such case, that even the kind of thing which you have started learning from the school days, you have used it so much and you think it is absolutely perfect, but you can be shown that what little bit of tinkering with that, with of course logic behind it, many new results you can get, and this is valid for all areas of science. This is just an example. And today's thing I am taken deliberately as Newton's law, because this is one of the most fundamental law which I have, or all of you use in science and engineering. Today's talk we are dividing into two parts. Part 1, some discussion on Newton's laws like Mach's principles and model of inertial induction, extension of Mach's principle and the model of mean rest frame in an infinite non-expanding universe satisfying the perfect cosmological principle, derivation of the new laws of motion from the proposal, and the exact equivalence of inertial and gravitational masses as a natural consequence. And the second part will be whatever proposed model we are going to present here, when we apply it to various phenomena in our solar system or universe, how we get it, that whether the predictions by the new law they are really observed or not, that we will take up through various examples as you can see noted here. So, part 1, revisiting Newton's laws. What are the points we will be presenting? First of all, I will tell you what are the unresolved issues with Newton's laws. Though you may think that there cannot be any such thing, but you will see there are quite a few. Next, it will be what kind of possible modification of those things we can think of, so that the difficulties which we present are resolved. Next will be what are the results of that modification which we will be proposing, and finally what is the ultimate consequence so far as our universe is concerned. So, these are the first kind of presentation I am going to tell it to you. Like Newton's law, you all know Newton's two quantitative laws. One is the second law, which says that force applied to an object of inertial mass mi accelerating at the rate a, f is equal to ma. Now, here I will just point out that this mass here though we drop this subscript inertial, but actually it is a property of matter which we call as inertial mass. This is one most important law we all use. The other quantitative law is that if there are two objects of gravitating mass, this is a different property, remember, it is mg, this is gravitating mass of the earth, gravitating mass of the apple divided by the distance square multiplied by a constant, that is f. These are the two quantitative laws of Newton we use very extensively. Now, question, and what are these problems with these laws? First type of problems is ambiguity, second type of problem I will tell you will be a mystery, and third paradox. What is the ambiguity? The question is the frame of reference. So, when you are told that force is equal to mass into acceleration, the point which is always not mentioned, but you remember it, that it is valid only if acceleration a is measured in an inertial frame of reference. Then the next question comes, what is an inertial frame? Then Newton gave this answer that it is that frame in which f is equal to ma is valid. I hope you realize the funny answer you get that way. So, this is the ambiguity in the laws of motion, that the frame of reference cannot be defined properly. Next is the mystery. What is the mystery? Now, you will find, according to Feynman, the greatest mystery of physical science, that these two properties, that inertial mass property and gravitational mass property, they are completely two different things, but they are always same. This is called the principle of equivalence, and this is the root from which the general theory of relativity was derived. But still there is no proof why inertial mass will be exactly equal to gravitational mass, and according to Feynman, this is one of the greatest mystery in physical science. Next is paradox. What is paradox? Let us see with the gravitational law. So, you know, this is our universe, infinite universe, say, and we are here. For example, there is a mass particle m, then you can always imagine any point in the universe and conceive a sphere with that point as center and that distance as radius. Then what will happen? You know, the mass contained in this volume of the universe will attract this material body by a force F, and this force F is given by this, according to Newton's law of gravitation. Now, you consider the rest of the universe outside this sphere in form of very thin spherical shells, uniform spherical shells. You know that the gravitational force on a mass particle inside a uniform spherical shell is 0, that is taught even in schools. So, you know that rest of the universe can be considered to be composed of such thin uniform spherical shells. So, the total force acting on this by the outside universe is 0, but the force acted upon, or a force acting from this, is F. But you could take this point anywhere. So, you could show that this mass particle is attracted by some arbitrary force in any direction, which again is nothing but a nonsensical thing, and that is the biggest problem with the gravitational law. It is called the paradox. This is the gist of what I have said. So, therefore, you see there are three major problems. One we call as ambiguity, other is the mystery, and third is the paradox. Now, before I proceed further, I have to tell, many of you may not be aware of, about one thing which is called Mach's principle. There was one contemporary philosopher, contemporary with Newton, George Berkeley, in 1717. When Newton was asked that this mass is being resisted to be accelerated, which we call force, why it happened? This acceleration is with respect to what? The Newton's answer and his concept was that acceleration is something absolute. It is the intrinsic property of matter that if you try to accelerate, it will resist it. That means, when you try to kick a ball, you get a force reaction. It is nothing but the intrinsic property of matter. But Mr. Berkeley said, no, that is not the case. It is you are trying to accelerate the matter with respect to the matter present in the rest of the universe, that they are actually opposing this acceleration and creating this resistance. That means, you are kicking a ball and facing a force in your toe, it is because you are accelerating the ball with respect to the matter present in the rest of the universe. So, this is a profound difference you can see. In one case, inertia is a property of matter, intrinsic property of matter. It says that if you try to accelerate, it will be resisting. Whereas Berkeley is saying, no, inertia is not an intrinsic property of matter. You are trying to accelerate it with respect to the other matter present in the universe, and they are providing this resistance. So, anyhow, people really did not bother about this kind of philosophical intricacies, and people started using Newton's law, getting excellent result, and there was all over triumph of Newton's laws. Till 1883, there was the Austrian philosopher and scientist Ernst Mach. Mach's name you have heard, because Mach number you all are familiar with. So, he again brought back the same theory. He said that no, inertia is not an intrinsic property of matter, it is a relational property. You are accelerating this matter with respect to the other matter, that interaction produces the inertia force. This time he was somewhat lucky, until and unless you are supported by a big scientist, even Satyam Bose would have become nothing unless Einstein really took up his case and proposed it as Bose-Einstein theory. This time also Mach was very lucky to attract the attention of Albert Einstein, and he gave legitimacy to the proposal, and that is why this principle has been called Mach's principle, which says that inertia of a matter or resistance to acceleration is actually an interactive force with the other matter present in the universe. Suppose therefore, all the matter present in the universe are represented by these dots, and this is an object of mass, and you are trying to accelerate, then the field created by all these matter of the rest of the universe here, they are producing the resistance. This is the qualitative way to describe it. So, the inertial property of an object are determined by the presence and distribution of mass energy throughout all space, and the geometry of space time, and therefore, the inertial properties of every infinitesimal test particle are determined by the distribution of mass energy throughout the universe. So, Mach's principle now is telling that this is a gravitational mass, and these interactions are gravitational when you are accelerating. So, the resistance which is coming is dependent on this object's property, that is mg, but we are writing as mi as inertial mass, but it can be shown that mi is equal to mg from Mach's principle. So, what happened before you can do anything, you have to quantify. This was all philosophical discussion, that is fine, you can propose any philosophy, people will just put it here and throw out it here. So, therefore, now we come to 1950s when it got the first boost for quantifying. The quantifying Mach's principle, the model of inertial induction, here it says that if there is a particle of gravitational mass m2 and gravitational mass m1, if you are trying to accelerate it with respect to this particle at a distance r, then this will be subjected to a very small force Fi, which is not in conventional science or physics. So, total force acting will be the gravitational pull which is there, plus this extra force due to its relative acceleration, and this thing will be again felt if you are putting your finger here, but this is accelerating with a, then also you will feel the same phase. So, the force is actually dependent on the relative acceleration, whether it is acceleration of this with respect to this or acceleration of this with respect to this. And this force, small force, is quantified as this g into m1 m2 by c square r into acceleration. So, you can see now we are quantifying Mach's principle. This is nothing but Mach's principle, that one object accelerating with another object, there is a force. So, this force is quantified as this, and this Fi is known as inertial induction, and it was proposed by D.W. Sciama, Denis Sciama, a very famous professor of physics of Cambridge University. Have you heard about his student, PhD scholar, Stephen Hawking? You have heard. So, there is a joke about it. I was giving this lecture in another institution, a private engineering college. That was my mistake. So, there were a large number of students, and this point came, and I asked them, all the students, have you heard about Denis Sciama? And they said no. Then again I stopped and said, have you heard about his PhD scholar? Then who is he, sir? I said, Stephen Hawking. Said, no sir, we have not heard. So, how Denis Sciama got this idea into his brain is that he found this also is there in Coulomb's law. If there are two electric charges, they will attract, and it is very similar to gravitational attraction. And it has been found by experiment that if there is a relative acceleration between the two charged particles, then the total force will be this Coulomb force, which we know, plus a force which is very similar to the expression Sciama proposed for gravitational inertial induction, and this is electrical inertial induction. Okay. So, he thought if it is valid for electrostatic attraction involvement, why not gravitation? But you cannot measure it, it is so small, it is impossible by any terrestrial experiment to measure it. So, laws of motion from inertial induction. So, therefore, what happens? People, once Sciama proposed this, then people started seeing that whether it will be possible to see that if there is a mass, gravitational mass m accelerating at rate a with the rest of the universe, then they tried to integrate this quantity with the mass present in the rest of the universe just by integrating it and using the observed mass energy density of the universe, and they found very nearly ma. So, you start with gravitational mass and you get approximately ma, and they tell that the kind of uncertainties are involved in all the properties used. This 0.1 is very suggestive that perhaps Mach's principle is correct. So, if it had been exactly 1, then you would have got force is equal to mass into acceleration, Newton's second law. It would have also told you that you started with gravitational mass here, but you have come to inertial mass. So, they are nothing but the same thing. So, only problem is that it is only 0.1, not exactly 1. But there is some credibility to the proposal of Ernst Mach and Denis Sciama. The result has to be Fi is equal to ma, then only we will get what we know as Newton's law. Now, let us have a look at our universe in the very large scale, how our universe looks at very large scale, because unless we have a model of the universe, you cannot integrate over the whole universe as it has been done here. So, it is our local group. You can see this is the Milky Way in which we are related. The students, you know that our Milky Way is the galaxy in which Sun is located. Sun is one of the 10 raised to 11 stars our Milky Way has. Our Milky Way is a spiral galaxy with 10,000 crore suns in it. Our sun is one in a remote corner from the center. So, this is the Milky Way, and there are some local galaxies. Nearby big spiral galaxy is Andromeda, this is Triangulum galaxy, and other some objects, and this is 1 million light year. Our Milky Way galaxy is about 1 lakh, that is 100,000 light year across, and this distance is 1 million light year. Now, if you go to a still larger scale, then you find this becomes 10 million light year. So, with that you can see now there are so many galaxies, and this is 10 million light year. When you go to still larger scale, then this is 100 million light year, and you can now see now dots of galaxies, they have started becoming clouds of galaxies. So, you can see the universe has started looking, this is actual picture, it is not imaginative artist's dream, the actual computer oriented plot of the galaxies. Then if you go to still further large scale, it looks like this, universe looks like a foamy object, and if you go to still larger scale, universe will look like absolute blank, that means uniformly distributed. Anyhow, so this is the real plot of our universe, 1 million galaxies by computer. Each dot you can see is a galaxy, and there are 1 million means 10 lakh galaxies has been plotted using computer in Princeton, but this was also done almost 30 years back. So, now if you do it, we can see much beyond, and universe looks far more uniform in the large scale. So, therefore, the indications are that universe is homogeneous, quasi-static and infinite. It is infinitely large, not bounded, it is uniformly smeared by matter in the large scale, and it is quasi-static, there is no expansion or all kinds of things. So, therefore, what happens? We can have a mean rest frame of the universe. I can have a coordinate system taking a large chunk of the universe here, having its center of mass here, another large chunk of the universe its center of mass, another large chunk of the universe center of mass. You add them and you get a frame of reference which has no motion. It is a perfect absolute frame. So, it is possible to have an absolute frame of reference. Now, our objective now is to examine if the idea of an absolute frame of reference or a preferred frame of reference is possible. Now, let us apply the proposed model, universal interaction in which the interaction with the matter present in the rest of the universe is considered, and local interaction in which the interaction with the nearby matter is considered, effect of the interaction with the far away matter is negligible. Now, extension of this Mach's principle, that is very important, that is what I have done and I am presenting it. So, if there are two objects with gravitational mass m1 and gravitational mass m2, here is the real story starts in today's lecture. If it is moving with some acceleration a and there is some extra force as proposed by Denis Sciama, why not there is some force due to the relative velocity? So, what I thought that okay, let us tinker with that and let us also put a term, another force which is an extension of Mach's principle. Mach's principle is only relating to acceleration, but we are extending it to velocity also. That is, if two objects are moving with a relative velocity v, then also there will be an extra inertial induction force of this. Now, if you interact with the whole universe, this is your mass particle with gravitational mass m, and there is a small chunk of the universe here. So, its interaction will give its small force df. Now, if you integrate over the whole universe, so this is your df term, these are the three terms we have said. If you now integrate over the whole universe, what you will find is something very interesting. You will find that this static Newtonian term vanishes because it is symmetric in all sides. So, gravitational pull will cancel. This term, second term, velocity dependent term will be something like this, and the acceleration dependent Sciama's term will be something like this. So, now if you continue further, you will find the attenuation of gravity is there. If you take it, you finally I get this wonderful result. Total force acting on a mass particle of gravitational mass m is equal to minus a constant into m v square minus m a, exactly m a. So, this is Newton's second law. You can derive Newton's second law, it is not a law therefore anymore. You start with the gravitational interaction, get f is equal to m a. This is an extremely small term. So, generally it is not even observed. So, Newton's second law is derived, and we get two other things, that this constant k, c is the speed of light, k is given by this, where this is a constant, rho is the density of the matter in universe, and g you know is the gravitational constant. But gravitational constant is not a constant anymore, it is actually a constant which is decreasing with distance, which is minus k by c into r. And therefore, you can see that equivalence of inertial mass and gravitational mass with which we started, they are exactly same, that you can prove just by this simple derivation. And the value of k has been calculated using the value of rho, density of the universe. We find it 1.21 into 10 raised to minus 18 per second, we have calculated. You can see such a small number, and when you divide it by c, it becomes 10 raised to minus 26, something so small you cannot detect by simple experiments. So, as found from the numerical value of this, you can see that effect due to the proposed velocity dependent inertial induction is extremely small. How do we verify it? We need the fastest possible objects moving through the longest possible distances. And what could be such things which are moving at the fastest speed and traversing largest possible distance? Yes, light from distant galaxies, isn't it? Let us use that. A photon, what happens to it when it starts its journey billions of light years away and come to our eyes? What this cosmic drag is doing to it, and we will see that. The effect of the cosmic drag that has resulted from this application of the proposed model can be seen through the redshift of the photon. You know, a photon has some energy, and you know E is equal to h nu, h is Planck's constant, nu is the frequency. So, if the energy decreases, frequency decreases, but the speed is frequency into wavelength, which is constant c. So, if the frequency decreases, wavelength will increase, that means it will become redder, we call it redshift. What is redshift of photon? That it starts with a particular wavelength at source, but when you observe it has become more, that quantity is called redshift. And the quantitatively redshift is a fraction, the increase in wavelength divided with the original wavelength. This is a very important thing for all astronomy or cosmology. Now, this redshift is caused by two things, either by the recession of the source, we call it Doppler effect, or it could be also by the loss of energy, and that could be considered as tired light. Now, see what happens. This is the distant star which is emitting the light. This photon is at some distance x, moving with a speed c, its energy is h into nu, our eyes distance from the source is r. So, the photon of energy E is subjected to a cosmic drag which we have derived as this. Hence, the loss of energy if it moves by an amount dx is given by this. So, if we integrate it, you will find simple result that the frequency at any place divided by the original frequency is decreasing exponentially with the distance travelled. So, if we can show quite clearly that redshift is equal to nothing but that constant k by c which we derived from our integration of the inertial induction into r. So, redshift is proportional to the distance covered. And let us plot. These dots are all plots of the experimental values of the redshift with distance, and this line is the theoretical calculation. So, you can see the theoretically calculated value of cosmic drag, there was no assumption actually, it was pure deduction. But you can see the observed cosmological redshift, which we think that as if universe is expanding, and this redshift is due to the Doppler effect of the recessional motion, need not be there. It could be due to this cosmic drag, and the observation and the theoretical prediction of redshift is exactly matching. So, this is the first corroboration. There are two things we have found. First, inertial mass has been proved to be equal to gravitational mass, and the cosmic redshift, cosmological redshift what we observe can be reproduced purely by theoretical prediction. So, there is some evidence that maybe there is some value to the proposal we have made about the velocity dependent inertial induction. So, thus the observed cosmological redshift of distant galaxies and other objects are generated without any universal expansion, and no Big Bang or creation of universe is required. The idea of Big Bang etc. all came because there was no other explanation for those redshifts, and the universe is infinite in both space and time and non-evolving as a whole, satisfying the perfect cosmological principle. So, when the gravitational potential energy of a particle of rest mass m is determined using the model, it comes almost equal to minus mc square. So, but the significance of that I will not discuss now. There are more important things. So, the general rule results from the proposed model are, we get a mean rest frame of the universe which exists, and this removes the ambiguity about the frame of reference which we had in Newton's theory. The force law is derived from the gravitational interaction, establishing the exact equivalence between the gravitational and inertial mass. The gravitational constant decreases exponentially. It was suspected by Laplace, but he could not prove it, and this removes the gravitational paradox. Now, you will find the kind of paradox we had with the gravitational law of Newton does not exist, it is eliminated. And the gravitational potential energy, just now I said, which leads to very interesting result as minus mc square. And so, all the three major problems of Newton's laws are removed. And also we have proved that the equivalence of inertial gravitational mass, we have theoretically proved it. We have theoretically derived the Newton's law of motion, which we call a law, and we have shown that this model leads to the cosmological redshift exactly as you observed. So, next what? As a you can say that okay, fine, perhaps these were coincidences. So, as the results have been intriguing, in the next part what we will do, the model will be applied to a number of astrophysical and celestial phenomena which we observe in our solar system and see whether predictions match or not. So, that is the second part. Application of the proposed model, we will have universal interaction. I showed that cosmological redshift has been produced, and local interaction in which the velocity dependent term will be more important, that we will see. The interaction of local nature, two types of interaction of light with matter and interaction of matter with matter. We will consider both these two types. Photon matter interaction. Yeah, this is an object of radius r, mass m. So, it radiates, but the gravitational pull elongates the wave, and you get the gravitational redshift as derived by Einstein, g by m by c square into r. But if we have the inertial drag also, then what will happen? The redshift will be more, because there is gravitational pull and also inertial drag, the velocity dependent term. And so, what will happen? The total redshift will be much more than what is predicted by Einstein's simple theory. It will be 67% more. Is it seen? Let us see that. Now, this really is a very important thing found in white dwarf. White dwarf are compact stars which a large redshift, and we find very interestingly that white dwarfs are very high density stars and gravitational redshifts are pretty large, 10 raised to minus 4. The added magnitude of the redshift due to velocity dependent inertial induction will make the star to appear more massive if the whole magnitude is assumed to be due to just gravitational redshift. Obviously, something which is actually 1.67 gm by c square r If you assume it to be gm by c square r, obviously m will appear to be more, and that is precisely what has been found, and it has remained as a major controversy. So, according to the conventional theory, redshift is this, and with the inertial induction imposed along with that, it will be this. So, mass which by conventional theory will be this, but by modified theory will be this much. If the redshift is z, then the mass of that object star will be this much. So, lot of experiment observation has been done. So, by different methods of the white dwarf, and we have found all the astrophysical means of mass determination that gives the average mass of a white dwarf is 60% of solar mass. Solar mass is sun's mass. If you use the gravitational redshift of 83 white dwarfs, the average mass of the white dwarf is coming as 80% of solar mass, and this mismatch by the two different methods has never been possible to take care of. But if you consider the modified law, then this reduces to 0.5 or 0.55, they are very much near. So, the controversy of the white dwarf mass can be easily removed. If we come to something more near, there are, this experiment was proposed by Narlikar to me, and he told that, Amitabh, you check this, that if a photon with lambda wavelength moves with velocity c, what happens when it grazes past a massive object? So, it will be pulled here and its energy will increase, but when it goes away, it will be again pulled back and that energy will be lost. But if you consider the inertial induction, then it will be always resisted whether it is moving here or here. So, it will result in a resultant redshift, and that is given, easily calculated and given by this according to our proposed theory. And it has been calculated that for typical star, the resultant redshift will be approximately of the order of 10 raised to minus 6, that is the fraction of wavelength increase by original wavelength. Typical white dwarf, these are not possible for us to do any experiment with, we will not consider, but we can do experiment with sun. So, we will see whether if a light passes through sun, it suffers this redshift or not. It has been found and not been explained so far that if once I think one star was passing very near the sun, actually sun was moving and that star came very near. It was found that the star's light showed a redshift which goes to almost 10 raised to minus 7 when it was 5 solar radii away. Then of course again it went down to its normal value. So, there was no excess redshift, but when it came near sun, the proposed redshift was actually observed. Similarly, when NASA sent this Pioneer 6, that spacecraft, so when it went behind the sun in our solar system, it was transmitting signal at a particular frequency. It was found that the redshift of that signal was increasing as it was nearing the sun and became almost 10 raised to minus 6, but as soon as it crossed the sun and went away, that extra redshift was gone. So, this is an experimental proof that when light or any electromagnetic wave passes very near the sun, it suffers a redshift of the order of 10 raised to minus 7, but there is no conventional explanation for this. So, there is another proof of this, which there is some unexplained redshift of the, which is coming from the rim of the sun, which has not been possible to explain. I will show you the result without going into much discussion. So, these are the excess redshift we find when you take the light from the limb of the sun's disk, that means the periphery, but it has not been possible to explain that why it should be this, it should be constant. But this modified theory, when you apply, it produces the redshift which matches exactly equal to what we find in very large number of experiments, hundreds experiments are conducted. So, it matches exactly the observation, which has not been possible to explain by conventional physics. Thus, in all the three cases of photon matter interaction where experiments have been possible, it is found that the proposed model produces correct results. Not only that, it also resolves the unexplained mass discrepancy in white dwarf, it explains the unexplained redshift of light grazing past the sun, and it also explains the long standing issue of excess redshift in the solar spectrum at the lip. Remember, all these things are done without any free adjustable parameter in the model. There is no adjustable parameter anywhere. You cannot tinker with your result. Now, let us come to the last section, which is the most important one, that is the matter-matter interaction. This inertial induction which I propose, it is not necessarily confined only in light matter or such thing. Any two matter mass particles will also show the same effect, and let us see whether there are possibilities of detecting it by our observation. Most important result which comes out, which is not possible by conventional science and mechanics, is transfer of angular momentum from one spinning body to another orbiting body. You know, if there is an object here, another object here, it will orbit around their common center of mass. You know that. And if this is spinning, then you know it will be seen that this angular momentum of this spinning body can be transferred into the orbital angular momentum of this body. So, angular momentum can be transferred without any physical contact between two bodies, which is not possible by conventional physics. Therefore, how it is done? It is moving in this, rotating like this. So, this particle is moving away from this. So, there will be inertial induction force. This is moving in this direction with respect to this. So, it will be pushed back. So, therefore, the resultant force due to these two particles on this is an opposing torque, and on this it is a resultant force. So, this pushes it away, increasing its angular momentum, orbital angular momentum, and this breaks it and it spins loose. So, total angular momentum remains constant, but this is the spin angular momentum is being lost and orbital angular momentum is being gained. This is something very spectacular because it cannot be achieved by conventional physics. But is it present? Let us see. And only experiment we can do in our solar system, that is our laboratory. So, you know that earth which is rotating 24 hours one rotation, the rotational rate is not constant. You know that earth is slowing down slowly, and the rate of slowdown is minus 6 into 10 raised to minus 22 radian per second square. It should be minus 2 actually. So, this spin omega is slowing down. This is the deceleration rate. Remember this value, 6 into 10 raised to minus 22. The conventional explanation, some of you might have read about it, that it is the tidal phenomena. What it is? It says that this is the earth spinning, this is the moon, and the ocean water body is bulged like this due to gravitational attraction of the moon, and this bulge is almost locked with the moon, and moon is moving in 28 days or 27 days, and this is moving in 1 day. So, it is much faster. So, therefore, it has a relative motion with respect to the bulge, this water shape, and this produces a friction. We cannot calculate the friction, but it is said that this friction is just enough to produce that angular retardation, but theoretical calculation is not possible. According to this theory, moon should have seen actually, because if the angular momentum of these two bodies remains same and moon is acquiring angular momentum, so it will slowly go. How moon is gaining angular momentum? Because this bulge, due to earth's motion, due to friction, it is slightly shifted. Because it is slightly shifted, this asymmetric body produces a gravitational attraction which has a component in the transverse direction. So, moon is slowly going away from the earth, gaining angular momentum. You know, in orbit, gain angular momentum means it is receding. You see, so therefore, if you assume that this total angular momentum loss is due to this phenomena, then 1000 million years ago, both the earth and the moon should have been very close, so close that they would have been destroyed by their mutual gravitational pull. But from sedimentological evidence we know that tidal phenomena for last 3000 million years exist, and there is no sign of any close approach, because tidal strength is inversely proportional to 6th power of this distance. So, you can imagine if the distance reduces to some value, the tidal strength would have been, tidal phenomena strength would have been increased by r to the power 6, that rate, but there is no such sign of it. And there is another way to find out if the angular momentum of the earth is being robbed by the moon only through the tidal friction phenomena. How? It can be done by plotting the number of days per month against the number of days per year. So, there it will be seen that if it is the number of days per month, how it is done I am telling you very briefly. You know that there are certain bivalves, some ocean creatures, where every day there is a layer, metabolism layer, and the thickness of that metabolism layer depends on the duration of the sunlight, and duration of the sunlight, you know, it fluctuates because your day becomes longer in summer, shorter in winter. So, by taking this section and finding how many layers are there in one cycle of this longer day to shortest day and to a longer day, that means 1 year, that tells you how many number of days per year that you can find. Similarly, there is another effect from which you find out the number of days per month, that is from the tidal phenomena. High tide, you know, will be during full moon and new moon. Using that, again there is some signature which you can use, and geologists have done it, and they have been able to find out number of days per month, lunar month. And you see the spectacular way you can get the result. This is, if you plot at a particular epoch the number of days per month and number of days per year, if you plot, you will find this is the actual observation. There are some inaccuracy, but it is like this, and if you do it theoretically, then you get only this line. So, you can see theory and observation does not match. That means the tidal friction theory is not really tenable. So, the mismatch between the expected and according to the tidal friction model and the observed result is very clear. The fact, actually now tidal friction model has been abandoned by the experts, but in all textbooks you will still find that this is given as the phenomena or reason behind our slowing down. If this is not the slowing down mechanism, then what is? That is what is our next question. Let us apply the proposed model of inertial induction. So, it should be noted that transfer of angular momentum, which I have shown by inertial induction between the earth and the sun, is much larger than between the earth and the moon. So, we can neglect the interaction of moon and earth for inertial induction, but let us see the interaction of the sun and the earth. So, if this is the sun and this is the spinning earth, so if you take a particle of the earth here and a particle of the earth here, what will happen when it is spinning? This will go towards sun, so it will be pushed back by inertial induction, and if it is moving away from sun, it will be pulled. So, what will happen? All the particles, if you integrate, you will get a resisting torque. Now, the sun's mass, sun's distance, earth's density variation, earth's size, everything is known, speed of rotation, everything is known. So, it is possible theoretically to calculate, that means this force is this much, this force is this much. So, you integrate it over the whole earth and you get the value of the torque, and the torque you calculate theoretically, only you use the density variation of the earth, nothing else, and the distance of the sun and sun's mass. You can calculate theoretically torque is equal to so much. Tidal friction torque cannot be calculated, and if you also know the moment of inertia of the earth, if you know the moment of inertia and you know the torque, you can find out the secular retardation. Simply divide torque by the moment of inertia of the earth, and theoretical value we get. Remember that observed value is minus 6 into 10 raised to minus 22, and theoretically calculated value is minus 5.5 into 10 raised to minus 22. So, what it says that only 0.5 into 10 raised to minus 22, that part could be due to tidal friction, but the major part is because of the inertial induction with the sun. And I can tell you one thing, my students, that matching of values like this with 10 raised to minus 22, these, that is not easy. It cannot come by just accident. So, you will be now tempted. So, therefore, looking at this wonderful result, that again let us compare. So, you can see now, if you measure the or theoretically calculate the number of days per year and days per month according to inertial induction, and you bring this here, you will find it is not matching exactly, but much better than the result here. So, you will be now saying, okay, let us go to another planet, Mars. Mars is rotating and Phobos is an artificial satellite which is spinning, and it is seen that Phobos suffers a secular acceleration which is very large, 0.6 into 10 raised to minus 3. How come it gets so much of drag? Because here only a drag will accelerate it. So, because there is not much water or anything, so can tidal phenomena produce such a large drag? It is really difficult. When it applied the inertial induction model and theoretically calculated the rate at which it should accelerate, it was about half into 10 raised to minus 3. Again, you can see the difference is not much, order of magnitudes are same. And if you do it with DEIMOS, of course, you know the DEIMOS value theoretically we get this minus 5 into 10 raised to minus 23. Observed value is very inaccurate, it is minus 2.46 into 10 raised to minus 23, but plus minus 6 into 10 raised to minus 23, which is so large. So, this falls within the range, but this is very inaccurate result. Most important is sun. Now, sun does not have a big moon which can rob its angular momentum like moon can do for earth. The question is, if we theoretically calculate just using the interaction of sun with Mars, we get a retardation rate of Mars as minus 1.25 into 10 raised to minus 22 radian per second square. But there is no moon. Only problem is nobody has ever tried to find out whether Mars has this secular retardation or not. If it is found that Mars has this kind of a secular retardation, then you cannot explain with any kind of secular retardation, not possible, because there is no tidal phenomenon, nothing. So, you have to give credibility to this kind of a proposal. Last problem is solar angular momentum, which is a very serious problem. You know that sun consists of 99.9% of the total mass of the solar system, but only 0.5% of the total angular momentum. Almost all the angular momentum of the solar system is contained in the angular or orbital angular momentum of the planets. Where from this angular momentum has come? Now, you know that according to the theory that a part of the cloud which condensed slowly, which was a rotating cloud because our galaxy is rotating. So, then it was condensing and became a protosun which was very hot due to its compressed thing, but it was rotating, spinning at higher and higher speed because its moment of inertia is becoming much lower. To maintain the angular momentum, it was spinning at a very high speed. When it starts spinning at very high speed, what will happen? It will eject material from the equatorial plane. So, they become the planets, and protoplanetary disk is this, but this whole thing is still rotating. Then what happens? This takes almost 10 raised to 6 years, and here when it becomes so hot, then the nuclear synthesis starts, the nuclear reaction starts. Then we call that it has reached the main sequence, where the energy is produced by nuclear fusion, and that starts then becomes stable. It cannot condense any further because there is radiation pressure. And what happens? This radiation completely cleans the whole solar system, only the planets remain, and this, when our sun started its nuclear reaction till today, it is about 5 billion years, and it took only 10 million years to reach this stage from the cloud. So, question is that where this angular momentum has gone, because angular momentum was a part of the material matter. So, therefore, 99.9% of matter should have contained 99.9% of angular momentum. So, now therefore, scientists are convinced that it has transferred the angular momentum to the protoplanetary disk and the planets. How it has done? Because there is no mechanism. So, Fred Hoyle did lot of work, and that is the last work which is still today there. According to conventional theory, they said that during this period it was so dirty, there was so much of dust, cloud, etc., that they had almost physical interaction, and therefore, during this period friction and other things like say solar wind, all those things transferred the solar angular momentum to the planets, almost all of it. So, therefore, as soon as it entered this main sequence, because after it has reached the main sequence, it has been cleaned because of the radiation pressure. So, all the angular momentum is lost here, and we are continuing with that. But if we apply this theory, but here no theoretical calculation, not much theoretical calculation was possible, because the mechanism of transfer was an extremely hodgepodge thing. But if we apply the velocity dependent inertial induction model for the whole period, then we find very interesting result. So, angular momentum theoretically comes out as 1.4 into 10 raised to 41 kg meters per second. I use the same data used by Hoyle, and when the transfer mechanism is based on inertial induction is considered. It is a theoretical calculation, and the actual value of sun's total solar angular momentum is 1.5 into 10 raised to 41 kg meter per second square. So, it agrees so well. It is a pure theoretical calculation, and this is the observed value. And there is another thing which is very important. Here you know that all the angular momentum according to the conventional theory was lost here, but according to this the main amount of angular momentum has been lost here, because this is the longer period. It is 4.6 into 10 raised to 9 years, and here it is only 10 raised to 7 years. So, most of the angular momentum was still there, but it got lost in this long period of main sequence, and this is also observed astronomically, because most of the old stars are slowly rotating, and those stars which have entered the main sequence very recently, they rotate very fast. So, concluding remarks, the proposed theory of extended Mach's principle based on the model of velocity dependent inertial induction leads to a number of interesting consequences and results as presented below in a consolidated format. The model of the universe is infinite, non-evolving, non-expanding, satisfying the perfect cosmological principle. Consequences of universal interaction: 1. Exact equivalence of gravitational inertial mass, no ambiguity about the frame of reference, no gravitational paradox, law of motion modified, a small cosmic drag acts on all bodies moving with uniform velocity even. So, first law of motion is not valid actually. First law of motion says if a man never falls ill, never dies. So, that is a meaningless kind of statement. Similarly, if no force acts on something, it continues to move forever is a meaningless statement, because nothing can move without having a drag. Then cosmic drag produces the cosmological redshift as observed almost exactly. No need of large amount of dark matter, as the true velocity dispersion of galactic clusters reduces drastically, which I have not presented here, but it is also done. And consequences of local interaction: the excess redshift of photons grazing massive bodies are explained. Excess redshift at the solar limb is also explained. Mass discrepancy of white dwarf which has been there is also resolved. A mechanism for angular momentum transfer without physical contact is obtained. It explains the secular retardation of the earth spin without any close approach problem and matching the days per month, days per year plot. secular acceleration of Phobos and Deimos are also explained, and long standing problem of solar angular momentum transfer is resolved. Mass distribution in spiral galaxies is also explained. It is also not given in this, but it is there in the book. Pioneer 11 anomaly is interesting feature depicted by the diurnal and annual variations match the theoretical pattern both in magnitude and in phase. And final conclusions are exact equivalence of gravitational and inertial mass, no ambiguity of frame of reference, no gravitational paradox, law of motion modified, cosmic drag is produced, and no need of large amount of dark matter. So, final recommendations will be like this: the secular change in the spin rate of planet Mars should be detected by NASA if there is any, that can yield a positive decision either in favor or against the hypothesis of velocity dependent inertial induction. So, as the planet Mars played the most crucial central role in deciding between the theory of a fixed Earth and an orbiting Earth, Kepler's work, it can again help to decide the nature of our universe. So, the references which have been used in this particular talk are this, and finally, I must thank all of you.
Thank you.